Um, okay, everybody, my name's Andy Phil, and I'm the founder of Gift 631. Then I'm going to introduce today's amazing guest, Mr. Bill McFarlan, and then Bill is going to take us from there. I've known Bill for over 15 years, a great friend, a great mentor, a great coach. Bill has helped me with, personally, I do not believe I would ever have become a conference speaker if it wasn't for Bill McFarlan. Bill is ex-BBC reporter and journalist, two-time published author, and an expert on language, communication, and self-belief. Today, we're really going to focus in on language and communication. And the obvious place to start, Bill, is you're sitting there with a beautiful pink elephant dangling from the ceiling behind you. So what is a pink elephant?
Who needs computer graphics, Andy, when you can pin this to the ceiling as I did when we went into lockdown and I turned our basement room here into a studio? So my company is called Pink Elephant Communication, and it's very simple. If I say, don't think of a bright pink elephant, well, that's what you think of. Now, if I say, don't think of the Eiffel Tower, it's the same effect. So when we ever tell people when we're communicating what we don't want them to do or don't want them to think, we're conjuring up the wrong image. And, you know, I had this conversation several times with a fellow I was partnered with on the golf course tonight, because Ian is a lovely fellow, a very successful businessman, but my goodness, he's the most negative person to play golf with. So, for example, almost on my backswing, as I said out loud, right, Bill, put it down the middle, he almost said under his breath, I could hear him saying, not where I've just put it, which of course is unhelpful when you're attempting to concentrate on what you do want to do rather than what you don't want to do. So why did this thinking come about? Way back, 1985, 86, I was appointed BBC Scotland sports correspondent. And when I read the article in a newspaper about my appointment, it was a nice article. And I looked at the one quote from me, and this was the quote. It said, I won't fall into the hole of covering only football. I won't fall into the trap, in other words, of covering only soccer. Now, why did I say that? Well, search me, because I'd written down in the bullet points I wanted to get across that I wanted to point out that last year I covered 17 different sports, and my goal this year was to cover more. But because of the culture I grew up in Scotland with, I felt almost inclined to tell people that don't think that I'll be doing this in a defensive way. And I realized there's a huge chasm between what I was writing for the BBC News and what I was saying personally. Now, when I was writing the news, I was telling people what had happened, what was happening right now, and what was about to happen. That's what you hear in the news. The Prime Minister is about to make a statement. Good. This happened this morning. Fine. This is happening as we speak. Good. But why was I, in my conversation with a journalist, when I'm there to promote my new job, why was I telling them what I didn't want them to think? That I would be falling into this hole of covering only sport? Well, you realize there are two reasons for it. One is baggage, because you're worried that they might think that that's what you're thinking about. And the other is because the culture that we grow up in is almost driving us, at times in the UK certainly, to be apologetic for our success. I'll come more to that later. But I determined on that day, 35 years ago, that from that point on, everything I ever said would be positive. Now, I take that into playing games of tennis and playing games of golf, talking to my family, certainly speaking to my clients, because who wants to deal with negative people? Gosh, you've got to be realistic at times. I've helped companies to make the announcement of a big redundancy many times in the past. I've helped companies at fatal accident inquiries where there's bad news to deliver, but there's a way of shaping these words so that what you tell people is the bad news in the most positive possible way. This has happened. We're very sorry about it. This is what we're doing about it. And this is how we expect to recover from it. There are ways of doing that. So my first principle, Andy, was to drop the pink elephant, the unnecessary negative. And I felt at that point that gave rise to a whole load of different ways of thinking. I then noticed that when I was traveling to Madrid to work with one particular client, when I'd set up my training company, that there was something about the conversations I was recording, the presentations they were making, that altogether felt, I don't know, more committed, than the ones that we make in the UK. And then I analysed the words they'd used, and there's an absence of words that we use in the UK, like try, quite, hopefully, relatively, reasonably, fairly, I think, I'll do my best. I can see Manny nodding away there, because these are, Manny, what I call watering down words. They diminish what we're saying. I'll quote two great gurus on the word try. One was Yoda from Star Wars. He said, there is no try, do or do not. And the other, a wartime leader, Winston Churchill, who said, do not tell me you will try, tell me that it is done. And you can see the point of both these things, you see, because what does try mean? If I said, could you try to pass me that pencil? Well, either you pass it or you don't. So when we're saying to a client, I'll try to get back to you by Friday, what we've done is we've watered down our commitment. So what I want to say instead are words of leadership. Like, instead of think, I would say, I firmly believe. Instead of try, I would say, what I'm committed to doing. I would use the words determined and my clear goal. So if I was in pitching for business, I would say, well, I firmly believe that I can help your organization move to another level. I'm committed to working with whoever you appoint to that team, determined to bring it success. And my clear goal is that everybody who joins that team becomes more successful because of the work we do together. Wow, I'm buying that. Now, what have I actually offered? I've offered an attitude rather than an outcome, because an outcome is very difficult to control. Take coronavirus. Whatever country you're dialing in from tonight or this morning or this afternoon, every country is attempting to do what they can in the best possible way. Some are maybe making a better job of it than others. Time will tell. But the language has to be very committed when you're telling people what you want them to do. What I've noticed is the most successful communication has come from leaders whose language is the most committed. They therefore compel us to act in a committed way. What they're often doing is they're breathing belief into us so we can believe in the measures they're asking us to take. So here's two rules so far. One, drop the pink elephant, the unnecessary negative, and tell us what you have done, what you are doing, what you will do. And number two, flush out the watering down words and replace them with the language of leadership. Let's talk about jargon. Jargon is any word that you use that I fail to understand, or that I use that you fail to understand. And when you think about it, most job titles are jargon. If I asked you to write down what your job title is just now, could you draw a picture of it? By contrast, draw the Eiffel Tower. That seems perfectly straightforward. Draw another world-famous monument. And let me just look at the faces around the table. I think there are 18 people on the call. I would say that if you are in your mind's eye or physically drawing another world-famous monument, I'll have a Leaning Tower of Pisa, there'll be a Statue of Liberty, there'll be an Arc de Triomphe, there might be a Brooklyn Bridge or a San Francisco Bridge. Perhaps there are the Pyramids of Giza, but there's a variety of them. Why are different people on the same call thinking differently? It's because I've lost control of the communication process. When I said Eiffel Tower, you saw Eiffel Tower. But when I say world-famous monument, you have to make up your own mind because it's vague. Let's take that a notch up. Let's go from vague to abstract. Most job titles are abstract. I am the executive chairman of Pink Elephant Communications. I can draw you a pink elephant, but I'm unable to draw an executive chairman. And that's the trouble with titles. It's the trouble with the language that we use in business. Now, can I take a show of hands here? Who has children, or it might be in some cases, in my case, grandchildren? Show of hands, who's got children here? Okay, right. I'm going to pick Helena. Just indicate by using number of fingers here. How many children do you have? 3. Okay, do you have any children aged between 7 and 9? Yes, good. 2 of them, perfect. It's a sign language. Now, all right, we're going to take one of Helena's children as our target audience. When I was writing the news for the BBC, Helena, I wrote it with a 9-year-old in mind because I'd worked for local newspapers and they were writing almost to a 7-year-old's comprehension. And I've written for the more serious newspapers, which are written for an 11-year-old. I remember one occasion, a news editor at the BBC handed me back the piece of paper, and it was a piece of paper in these days, on which my script was written. And he said, what does this mean? I said, well, I think what he's getting at, and he almost threw the paper back. He said, don't tell me what you think the guy's getting at. Tell me what he means. And if I don't understand it, what chance has the audience got? Big learning point. You don't want that to happen too often with your BBC News editor. So what I was doing was I was keeping it so simple that a 9-year-old would get it. So Helena, you've got the opportunity of running your pitches to clients across your children to see if they understand them. Because if a child gets them, everybody gets it. And then people worry that what you're going to do is talk down to people. Well, because I wrote the news for several decades, I realized I was talking to the level at which people would understand. And then as we progressed in the story, I was allowing it to become more complicated, taking them with me. I'll come to that in a second. But let's talk about jargon here. If we can turn jargon into clear pictures and anecdotes and stories, and I'm telling you some just now, then that will be far more memorable, because facts tell, but stories sell. And bringing in our own personal experience says, I've been there and done that. Therefore, rather than I have a marketing degree, these are the words I use, I'm saying, this I did for one company on one occasion, I can use the same principle with you, it works. So let's just turn jargon into clear pictures with anecdotes. That's rule number 3. Now, how do we structure all this? I like to use the pyramid of communication. Think of one of these Egyptian pyramids, and right at the top is point number 1. This is how we create a news bulletin. Good evening. Let's see, in Britain's case, the travel ban to Spain has been widened to include the Canary Islands and the Balearic Islands. So if anybody is traveling from UK to any of these countries, they must self-isolate for 2 weeks on return. Top of the pyramid, that's what's in it for the audience tonight, the most important thing. And all we have to do is say to ourselves, if I was sitting in the front row of the audience, what would interest me most in this group? I always spend at least half an hour with a new client saying, right, tell me before I speak at your conference or before I run this course, who's going to be in front of me? What's their background? Male, female, younger, older? Give me an idea of the job they do. I want to understand my audience. Now, once I understand my audience, I can ask 3 questions before I build the structure of a pyramid of communication. Question number 1, who's in the audience? Good. Question number 2, what key points do I want to make? And number 3, how do I arrange my key points to hit the target with the audience? Now I can put my most important point right to the top of the pyramid. 1 layer down, points 2 and 3, and then 4, 5, 6, and so on. The last one is always a call to action. What do I want the audience to do next? Do I want them to approach me over the coffee break and ask questions? Do I want them to ask questions now? Do I want them to email me? By the way, if you make all 3 suggestions, they'll forget 2 of them. So make 1 suggestion in your call to action at the end to avoid confusing people. So that pyramid of communication serves me every time I write an email, make a presentation, make a phone call, deliver a conference speech, run a training course. This right now, Andy and I decided I'd start with the pink elephant. Okay, that's the one, the most memorable thing I believe you will take away from tonight, this morning, is speak positively rather than negatively, because we conjure up the wrong image. So there we are, we're 4 points in, we've built our pyramid of communication, and that's the structure I use for everything now. Let's take that 1 stage further. You've made your presentation, you've made your pitch. What happens now is people ask you questions. Now, some people tell me, I hate the bit when they ask me questions. And I say, it's just another opportunity to hammer home your point. And here's what I do. I insist to myself that if someone asks me a direct question, I give them a direct answer, which starts yes, or no, or I don't know, or it's too early to say, or, well, I can only speak for my company. Let's take the too early to say. We've heard this a lot through coronavirus. When will this open up? When will that close down? When will people be able to do this? It's too early to say. We're monitoring what the disease is doing just now, and then we'll make a decision. You see? And it's the only answer that's available sometimes. Should we say no to clients? Absolutely. If you fail to say no, you will end up doing things that you wanted to avoid in the first place. We've got to say no at times. There are several forms of no. There's no, not at all, quite the reverse, on the contrary, absolutely not. And it depends on which is required as to which one I would play in. But when I give a direct answer to a direct question, I then imagine that I'm jumping off a diving board into a swimming pool, into the deep end. And I'm going to keep on swimming until I get to the shallow end where I can stand up. That takes me from the uncharted territory of what they're asking me, dealing with it directly, swimming to an area that I know better, where I feel in shallow water where I can stand up. And this is always my interview technique of starting with the moving from the area that you feel less comfortable with, answering it with what you know, and then going on to something you're very familiar with. By the way, at the shallow end are all the points from your pyramid of communication. They're all available. And I also like to think that what I'm doing is I'm aiming for the moral authority in what I'm saying. Is this going to help the company? Is it going to save unnecessary expenditure? Is it going to help people in their jobs? Is it going to be better for the planet? Is it going to be quicker, faster, cheaper? That's the moral authority of the argument. And if we're always thinking of that and we're direct in our answers, then to me, what we're doing is we're creating a winning combination. Now, put all that together in a pyramid of communication, and I'm going to be, number one, speaking positively, avoiding pink elephants. Instead of telling people what I don't want them to think, tell them what I do want them to think. Number two, I'm going to flush out the watering down words that diminish what I'm saying and take belief away from it. Instead, I'm going to put in words that add expression to what I'm saying, add belief to what I'm saying. Words like committed, determined, and I firmly believe. And Andy is a great exponent of I truly believe. I've seen him say it to his workforce many times before. Three, I'm going to bust jargon and turn everything I say into language that a 9-year-old understands. I'm going to talk in pictures, use anecdotes from my experience. Four, that pyramid of communication is going to hold it all together. And five, I'm going to give direct answers to direct questions. Now, I used to issue people with 36 golden rules for making a presentation, which, by the way, breaks rule number one, keep it simple. It's too many. So there's five, and I see Jim there. Hi, you, Jim. Haven't seen you for a long time. Nice to see you. I use 5 principles because that's enough for us to remember, and it gives us everything we need for a presentation. Andy, any thoughts on any of that?
Absolutely, Bill. I'm going to come back on a couple of things that you said in the other session because I think that's incredibly powerful for the group. I'm also going to say to everyone, Bill has kindly volunteered to come back in a few weeks and talk about the other area of his expertise, which is self-belief. And he mentioned attitude and confidence. So we're really going to hone in on that in the other session, which I highly recommend to everyone. Jim has also volunteered to come back for more sessions, and Manny's over there in Washington State. We're going to have a couple of sessions with Manny as well. So amazing opportunities to spend some time with some wonderful people from my global network. Bill, you got asked a fantastic question in the other session by Elizabeth. And the question was, in this pyramid of communication, if you have different people in the audience, maybe with different levels of expertise, how do you look after both, or the differences that you have within an audience? And you mentioned the golden thread.
Yes, so the mistake we can make, Andy, is we can go into higher level and leave people disconnected from what we're saying. The golden thread I talked about earlier is something that just runs from point 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, 5, 6, and there's a confluence, there's a flow to the whole thing you're talking about. Excuse me. What I always say to myself is there will be different levels of understanding in the audience. Pick up everybody as you go along. So start simply, allow it to become more complicated, taking everybody with you. But the great communicators are great explainers of things. I mean, I love watching 94-year-old David Attenborough, who we believe is a national treasure with his natural history programs in the UK. And he'll often start, this polar bear has been swimming for 9 miles. And you think, what's the relevance of this? He's getting to global warming and the melting of the ice cap, but telling this incredible story with his milk chocolate voice. You think, wow, this man just knows everything, but his real talent is for keeping it simple. When my first grandson, Ollie, was 3, I sat beside him in our home cinema one night and watched Attenborough take us through a night at the British Museum where he turned skeletons into dinosaurs. And at the end of it, I said to 3-year-old Ollie, "What's your favorite dinosaur?" He said, "Well, Papa, I would say it's a Stegosaurus, which is a carnivore, but nonetheless still a dangerous predator." And you think, what? How did he understand that? Because Attenborough helped him to understand it in that program. And now he was using that language at the age of 3. It was astonishing. That's somebody who's communicating brilliantly.
Yeah, and a couple of other things that came out in the other call. I mean, Julie Rickson, as she is now from Birmingham in England, talked about every time she's about to write an email or have a phone call or do a presentation, she now thinks just before she presses send or she speaks, she goes back through these 5 principles from earlier conversations she's had with yourself. One of the other ones, just before I open it up to the group, is one of the things you've really taught me is moving from the thin ice to the thick ice, getting back to, you know, an area where you're very knowledgeable, you're very strong, you're able to articulate, and moving away from, you know, where the ice is thin, where you're just uncomfortable. And maybe you could just say a few words on that, Bill.
Sure. Well, I watched with my wife a couple of nights ago a film called Breakthrough, which was about the true story of a 14-year-old boy in the States who was playing on thin ice and fell through and was dead for 45 minutes and came back from that and fully recovered. So thin ice, to me, is the metaphor of getting onto dangerous territory. When we get into a discussion where we feel we're outside our comfort zone, outside our knowledge, that's the thin ice. And that is perilous. So we need to get off that onto thick ice. But actually, the only kind of ice that's safe to me is the dry land. You know, go off the ice altogether onto dry land and climb up with the moral authority to the moral high ground. And that's what I say about saving money, helping jobs, improving circumstances. But onto your own territory as well, Andy, onto things you know. And to me, it's always legitimate to say, I don't know. What I have found in my experience, because that was a question this morning, what if you really don't know? It's fine to say, I don't know. And to me, it's okay to be vulnerable, because if you're trying to pretend to me that you know something and I discover you don't, I've stopped trusting you. I'll trust you if you tell me that you don't know.
Brilliant. Okay, everybody, we've got about 10 or so minutes for questions from the group for Bill. We'll follow our normal process. So if you've got a question, please unmute. Rachel, you've unmuted, so I'll go to you. So please ask your question and then across to yourself, Bill.
Sure.
I've got more of a comment. I've got my trusty pink elephant book that you have signed.
Great stuff, Rachel.
And it was funny, I was talking to Andy the other day and he said something and I was just able to grab it off the shelf because I've just finished rereading it. A couple of things that I suppose I want to take from, I firmly believe all the time now. I change my emails, I reread my emails and go, no, that's not right. So, and that's something that I picked up, I think it must have been 2009 or something that I saw you speak. Like a long time ago. So it is something that has changed everything. So awesome. Another comment I suppose I wanted to make is how people feel. So, you know, how people feel when you speak to them positively, negatively.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was doing a training the other day and I was saying we have to look in the mirror sometimes. Now, my earliest form of mirror, Rachel, was a videotape recorder, a very early camera. I'm talking early 80s when my now 38-year-old daughter was 2. And we're recording her climbing up the stairs saying, oh, you're doing great, darling. That's fantastic. Then I watched back the video and I had thought I'd pressed stop. It kept on recording. But when I asked 2-year-old Victoria to help me tidy up her toys and she ran away, I said, Victoria, you are a waste of space. And I heard this back. Now, I was quoting Basil Fawlty from Fawlty Towers speaking to Manuel, because that was just my sense of humor. And then I thought, what does a 2-year-old make of that? Well, Victoria became a clinical psychologist. I saw her this afternoon. She's fine. She's recovered. But I then became aware, Rachel, that things that we think are funny or that we're saying because it's funny to us can be deeply scarring. I mean, when I was 8, I moved from a local state school to a fee-paying school. And on day 1, the teacher said to me, you will be a failure like your brother. Now, he was being deadly serious. He was a really draconian teacher who punished you for forgetting your jotter or the name of a range of hills in Scotland and so on. And I lost all confidence. And these words reverberated around my head for at least 20 years until I realized I was almost becoming a workaholic, attempting to prove this teacher wrong. So what we say to people is hugely important. And the way I see it is, if you want to, like Marty McFly, go back to the future in the DeLorean car, you want someone to say, I'm visiting Rachel Morgan because she breathed belief into me. The year was 2005. We're at a conference. She turned to me and said, I believe you can do this. And I felt $1 million. Now, you want to be that person who breathes belief into other people. You instill loyalty. You help people to do better in their jobs. Their life becomes better. Your life becomes more enriched as a result. That's why I believe, Rachel, everything you say to people should be positive.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Rachel. Other questions that we have for Jim? Sorry, Bill. Jim's just said he's needed to disappear. He did have a question for you. So I will get Jim's question to you, Bill. What other questions do we have for Bill?
I have one. First,
hi,
this is Soumya. First of all, thank you for sharing the golden nuggets of wisdom. I got really few good points that I'm going to follow from now on. So I'm a change agent. So I have to influence change and business transformation, where I have to inspire people for moving towards business agility. So just following up on your advice, like be direct. So sometimes what happens is that I find a few, when I'm being direct, they are more resistant to change and they completely shut down. So what would be a good strategy to follow in those cases?
So when I'm talking about being direct, Soumya, what I'm particularly talking about is being direct in answering questions, to avoid beating around the bush. But I was a big fan of President Obama's style of answering questions. I mean, he would say, for example, now, a lot of people are critical of big government, thinking government interferes too much. And, I see where they're coming from, because it's your tax dollars and we've got to spend that wisely. What I'm always thinking about, though, is who do we need to help? And who we need to help are these people here. In other words, he's going halfway towards your argument, putting his arm around your shoulder and saying, come with me. I understand what you're saying. Come with me. There's another way of looking at this. And I'm far more attracted to that than people shouting down other people's arguments. In fact, I believe we're losing the ability to accept that other people have a point of view. And, Voltaire said, I may disagree with everything you say, but I would lay down my life to give you the opportunity of saying it. And we're losing that. So to me, as a change agent, you have to be able to say, I can see where your concerns lie. And I understand why you'd be concerned. Have you considered looking at it this way? Here's something I'd like you to think about, In other words, accept that people are nervous, or accept that they're concerned about what's being suggested. And this was something I was through many times, particularly with the drinks company Diageo, who make Johnny Walker, Gordon's Gin, Guinness beer, and so on. On one occasion, we made the announcement about the closure of the gin bottling plant in Langdon, Essex, in the southeast of England. And production rose in the 3 months between the announcement and leaving the site and closing the site, because Diageo handled it so well. They handled the communication so well. They explained it so well. They helped people find other jobs. They gave them good redundancy packages, and people worked harder, despite the fact they were leaving the job. So to me, the communication is a large way of how you handle that.
Yeah, and Simo, first of all, you'll be able to test how well I've taken on Bill's principles, because obviously I'm doing a presentation for you this evening, so you can have your little scoring chart to see how I go. But also,
I'm
Bill,
sure you'll do well.
when I firmly believe I'll do exceptionally well.
Exactly.
And when I went on my negotiation skills course, what you've just said there about change was actually one of the key points around negotiation, where you state the other person's position. So at least it acknowledges that you've heard them, you've listened to them, you're aware of their position, and then you bridge it to your own alternative point of view. So I believe it works for change, it works for influence, it works for negotiation. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left. So time for at least one more question. Let's make the most of the amazing Bill McFarlan whilst we have him. Any other questions for Bill? Helena.
Hi, it's been really interesting listening to you today, and I'm a territory manager and I work in health insurance, and I truly believe that I do talk in a positive manner, and I have I influence my team and my peers respectively quite well.
Yep.
I have found myself now that I'm starting to get into a platform where I'm involved in a lot more project working and in front of a lot more senior level leaders within the business, and I quite often find that I am losing my confidence
Right.
in that platform because I'm not used to their jargon, and I'm on my thin ice there because it's all new to me. As someone that is probably new to this team and doesn't have as much experience in these sort of platforms, do you have any advice for me to help me be more successful?
It's as much as anything, I would say, Helena, it's what you're saying to yourself. It's what the voice inside your head is saying. In fact, I was looking back at a recording today that I made last week where we've done an hour-long program on how to present. And I said, some people say, I get really nervous because my boss is sitting in front of me, judging me, or I get really nervous because it's complete strangers. And really, these are just stories we're telling ourselves. You've been appointed in the role to do a certain job, and they want you to carry out that role to the best of your ability. Now, that's different from you knowing what they're talking about at their level. And in fact, frankly, if they're talking in jargon, they're excluding you. They need to be the David Attenboroughs who are explaining it. And, take a bravery pill here and say, I wonder, sorry, could you explain that? That's a new term to me. Do it politely, obviously, without, you might actually find they don't know what it means. So you've got to be careful. But what I would say is, remember, focus on your role, use your words rather than play what I call bullshit bingo, adding in words that you think they want to hear. It's all nonsense. Just explain things simply from your experience, what you've found in the most effective possible way, and that will be doing your job to the best of your ability. And the second piece of that jigsaw, Helena, is once you prepare that way, coach yourself through the presentation saying, I'm well prepared, I've done my research, I'm explaining it simply, I'll do this confidently, I do my job well, this is what they want to hear, I will present it to the best of my ability. And keep coaching yourself in your head through that as you do it. And the outcome is that you'll both have done a good piece of preparatory work and you'll have delivered it well. It's two parts of the same equation. Would you agree with that?
And if I may, I would just add to that obviously, a lot of experience presenting to executives and boards and senior people. This is where the pyramid of communication is so important. When you're presenting to senior leaders, you have to stay in control of the conversation. Therefore, you have to get them, and you have to get them early. So smashing out my key points right at the start was critical. And one of the things that I used to say to a couple of members of my team is, don't build me a watch, just tell me the time. That's what you've got to remember when you're talking to a senior leader. You haven't got 20 minutes to tell them how the watch works, this, that, and the other. They just want the time. So to remember Bill's period of communication, to absolutely focus in on that key point. So I used to think about, what am I going to say first? What am I going to say last? And then I used to visualize the best presentation I'd ever done just before I went in the room. And I used to visualize the desired outcome I want, which was two executives going, wow, Andy, he really knows his stuff. Or whatever you want the executives to be saying about when you leave the room. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to call this to a close. First of all, I want to thank the amazing Bill McFarlan. Bill has been an incredible teacher to me over a long, long period of time. Rachel had the book, Drop the Pink Elephant. I strongly recommend you get hold of the book. I'll put a link so you can follow Pink Elephant Communications, the blogs, the wise words, the little video snippets, absolutely amazing. So thank you to everyone for either getting up early, breaking their day up, staying late into the evening. Thank you, Mr. Bill McFarlan, and stay safe and keep winning.
Nice to see you all. Thank you.